I am Abigail, 33 years old, and 1 week before my wedding, my mother called to announce she would rather see me walk down the aisle completely alone than upset my sister. She told me I was selfish for celebrating my marriage, while my sister was grieving a broken engagement. What she did not know was that I would not be walking alone. When those massive oak doors finally opened on my wedding day, the man holding my arm would make my mother drop her phone in absolute horror and expose a 33-year-old lie she built her entire life upon. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who tried to dim your light. The cold silk of the Vera Wang gown clung perfectly to my waist. I stood on the circular pedestal in the center of the VIP fitting room at Chicago's most exclusive bridal boutique. The dress was a masterpiece of French lace and hand-sewn pearls costing $15,000. It was paid for entirely by the crisis public relations firm I built from the ground up, a company my family conveniently pretended did not exist. The seamstress was just pinning the final layer of the cathedral-length train when my phone buzzed violently on the tufted velvet sofa. The caller ID flashed my mother Patricia's name. I took a deep breath, already bracing myself for whatever daily crisis she had manufactured this time. I answered the phone on speaker mode so I would not have to hold the screen against my face and risk ruining the delicate veil. I barely managed to say a polite hello before her voice pierced through the quiet elegance of the boutique. Abigail, I am absolutely not walking you down that aisle. Her voice was shrill, echoing sharply off the gold-framed mirrors. I am furious with you. Do you have any idea what you are doing to your sister? I watched the seamstress stiffen politely, pretending she was not listening while adjusting the hem around my ankles. My younger sister Brittany had just been dumped by her fiancé 3 weeks ago after he caught her cheating with a personal trainer. But in my mother's twisted reality, Brittany was the ultimate victim. Instead of being happy for my upcoming wedding to Liam, Patricia had turned my entire engagement into a mandatory mourning period for Brittany. I kept my voice perfectly level, falling back into the calm, professional tone I used to handle major corporate scandals. Mother, the wedding is in exactly 7 days. The invitations are out. The venue is fully booked. You promised you would walk with me. I could hear Brittany sobbing loudly in the background, a theatrical, breathy wail designed specifically for an audience. Patricia scoffed loudly through the receiver. Your sister is utterly devastated. Seeing you parade around in a white dress in front of hundreds of people is going to destroy her mental health. You need to tone down this whole selfish spectacle. In fact, you should just walk solo. Nobody wants to watch you gloat while your own flesh and blood is in agonizing pain. You are acting like an arrogant snob. My chest tightened with years of suppressed resentment, but I refused to let my voice crack. I had spent my entire adult life fixing public relations disasters, yet my biggest liability was always my own mother. Before I could even formulate a response, there was a shuffling sound on the line. My stepdad Richard took the phone. His voice was exhausted, carrying the heavy resignation of a man who had spent 30 years blindly surrendering to his wife's unreasonable demands. Look, Abby, just do what your mother says. Go solo. Stop causing so much drama for your mother. She is stressed enough taking care of Brittany right now without you demanding the spotlight. Just be the bigger person and let it go. We will see you at the venue. I looked at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. I saw a successful independent woman who had spent way too long begging for scraps of affection from a family that viewed her happiness as a personal insult. I did not scream. I did not cry. Crying was bad for the silk. I reached over, tapped the red button on my screen, and ended the call. No goodbye. No arguments. The silence in the boutique was heavy, but my mind was already racing. My mother thought she had dealt the final blow to my perfect day. She thought she had stripped me of my dignity and isolated me. But in the world of corporate crisis management, when someone tries to back you into a corner, you do not surrender. You change the narrative entirely. I took a deep breath, looked at the seamstress, and told her the dress was perfect. The real war had just begun. I stepped off the circular pedestal, the silk of the Vera Wang gown whispering against the carpet. I was ready to finalize the remaining balance when the boutique manager approached. Her name tag read Simone, and she looked terrified. She was clutching a tablet to her chest, her eyes darting nervously between me and the seamstress. "Miss Abigail, I am so sorry to interrupt." Simone stammered, her hands visibly shaking. "There is a massive issue with your account. I tried to run the credit card on file for the final $10,000 payment, but the system locked me out. It says the card has been restricted by the primary account holder." I frowned deeply, pulling my silk robe tightly around my bare shoulders. "That is impossible. I am the sole account holder on that card." Simone swallowed hard. "That is not the strangest part. 5 minutes ago, someone called our front desk, confidently identifying themselves as you. They verified your phone number, billing address, and email perfectly. The caller stated the wedding was canceled due to family circumstances and demanded we halt all alterations on the gown." A cold chill washed over me. Patricia. My mother had not just called to berate me. She actively tried to sabotage the dress purchase while I was standing right here. "And what else did this brazen caller say?" I asked, keeping my voice deceptively calm. Simone looked like she desperately wanted the marble floor to swallow her. "The caller demanded your $5,000 deposit be transferred to a different order. A rush order for a custom sapphire blue evening gown under the name Brittany. The caller said her sister needed the gown for a party next weekend." The audacity was impressive. My mother was not just trying to ruin my wedding, she was trying to fund Brittany's pity party using my money. Patricia assumed I was still a struggling junior publicist. She assumed canceling my credit card and stealing my deposit would leave me completely helpless, forcing me to crawl back to her and beg for assistance. Control through financial manipulation was always her game. When I was in college, she threatened to withhold tuition payments every time I refused to do Brittany's term papers. She always weaponized money. If I were a normal bride, this would be the moment I collapsed onto the velvet sofa in tears. But I was not a normal bride. I was the founder and CEO of one of the most ruthless crisis management firms in Chicago. I handled multi-million-dollar corporate scandals before my morning coffee. A financially abusive mother was child's play to me. "Simone, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention," I said smoothly, walking over to my leather tote bag. "First of all, do not transfer a single cent to any order under the name Brittany. In fact, permanently ban that name and my mother's phone number from your system. Second, the wedding is very much happening." I reached into my wallet and bypassed the standard bank cards I used as everyday family decoys. Instead, I pulled out a solid titanium American Express black card. It was untraceable to my family because it was registered to my private holding company. I spent years building my wealth in absolute secrecy, knowing that the second Patricia smelled money, she would bleed me dry to fund Brittany's failed ventures. I handed the heavy metal card to Simone. Her eyes widened comically as she recognized the exclusive card, an item typically reserved for billionaires and corporate executives, not the supposedly struggling daughter of a middle-class family. "Charge the entire $15,000 to this exclusive card right now," I calmly instructed. "Keep the original $5,000 deposit exactly where it is for now, because I will report that phone call to the fraud department of my bank this afternoon. Just secure the dress." Simone took the card with both hands, her professional demeanor returning instantly. "Right away, Miss Abigail. I will process this immediately and ensure the gown is locked in our private vault until you pick it up." As Simone hurried away to run the charge, I looked back at the mirror. The reflection staring back at me was no longer a desperate daughter trying to win her mother's conditional love. It was a woman ready to burn down a toxic empire. My phone buzzed again on the sofa. This time it was a text message. Not from my mother, but from the man who was about to help me orchestrate the greatest legal trap my family had ever seen. The message was from Jamal, my brilliant future brother-in-law, and it was about to escalate this quiet family war to a terrifying new level. I unlocked my screen and opened the message from Jamal. Jamal is Liam's older brother and an absolute force of nature. As a highly respected corporate attorney at a top-tier Chicago law firm, he possessed a razor-sharp legal mind, an impeccably tailored wardrobe, and a deep-seated intolerance for anyone who tried to manipulate his family. He is a proud African-American man who built his career dismantling hostile corporate takeovers, so dealing with my mother's petty manipulations was something he viewed as a sport. From the moment Liam introduced us, Jamal and I understood each other perfectly. We were both cold-blooded strategists when provoked. His message contained no greeting or small talk. It was just a single screenshot forwarded from an inside contact he maintained at the Grand Oak estate. The Grand Oak was not just a venue. It was the most exclusive and sought-after estate in the state of Illinois. It featured sprawling historical mansions, imported marble floors, and manicured botanical gardens that commanded $80,000 a night. It was where I was supposed to marry Liam in exactly 7 days, a booking I had secured 2 years in advance. I zoomed in on the screenshot. It was an email sent directly from Patricia to the venue's senior events director. The subject line read, "Urgent contract modification for Abigail's wedding." I read the body of the email twice, making sure my eyes were not deceiving me. The sheer entitlement radiating from the screen was breathtaking. "To whom it may concern," Patricia had written. "I am the mother of the bride Abigail. Due to unforeseen and tragic family circumstances, Abigail's wedding has been indefinitely postponed. However, we absolutely do not want the beautiful venue to go to waste, and we cannot afford to lose the non-refundable deposit. I am officially requesting that the contract be transferred immediately into the name of my younger daughter Brittany. We will be repurposing the Saturday evening reservation to host a single and fabulous empowerment gala to help her heal from her recent traumatic breakup. Please confirm this beneficiary name change directly with me." I stared at my phone. A single and fabulous empowerment gala. My mother was actively trying to hijack my $80,000 wedding venue to throw a massive pity party for my cheating sister. She did not just want me to walk down the aisle alone to punish me. She wanted to erase my wedding entirely, steal the deposit she believed I was struggling to pay, and replace my life milestone with a monument to Brittany's victimhood. A second text from Jamal popped up on my screen. Did she really think a premier estate would just transfer a legally binding contract to a completely different name based on an email from someone who is not even on the billing account? A third text immediately followed. "Tell me you want to crush them legally because I already have the cease and desist paperwork drafted. This is textbook tortious interference with a contract and attempted fraud. Just give me the green light, Abby." I smiled, the tension in my shoulders finally releasing. This was exactly why I adored Jamal. While most people would offer empty sympathies and tell me to be the bigger person, he offered actionable legal strategy. The audacity of Patricia's email was staggering, but it was also incredibly legally reckless. She was attempting to modify a high-value commercial contract over which she had zero legal authority. She assumed that because she was my mother, the world would simply bow to her demands and overlook the technicalities. She still viewed me as the obedient teenager whose life she could rearrange at will, completely unaware of the empire I had quietly built. I typed my reply to Jamal. "Do not execute the legal trap just yet. Let them think they are winning this round. I need to see her face when she thinks she has cornered me completely. I am going to ask them to meet me right now. Keep your phone close." I thanked Simone. The boutique manager grabbed my designer tote bag and walked out of the bridal shop into the crisp Chicago air. I dialed my mother's number. She answered on the first ring, her voice dripping with exaggerated fake sorrow. "Oh, Abigail, are you calling to apologize for your selfish behavior earlier? Have you realized how much pain you are causing your sister?" I kept my tone perfectly neutral, suppressing the urge to laugh at her delusion. "Actually, Mother, I think we need to talk in person. Things are clearly tense and I want to hear Brittany out. Meet me at the cafe downtown in 30 minutes. Bring Brittany." Patricia eagerly agreed, clearly believing she had successfully broken my spirit. She thought she was walking into a tearful surrender. She had no idea she was walking into a meticulously planned ambush. 20 minutes later, I pushed through the revolving glass doors of Le Petit Verre, an upscale French cafe nestled in the heart of the downtown financial district. The scent of roasted espresso and buttery croissants filled the warm air, providing a stark contrast to the cold reality of my family dynamics. I scanned the elegant room, past the marble counter and the velvet seating until my attention was drawn to a secluded corner booth. There they were. My mother and sister had already made themselves quite comfortable, but they were not just drinking coffee. Brittany had a portable ring light clipped to her smartphone, which was strategically propped up against a sugar dispenser. She was actively live streaming to her 30,000 Instagram followers. Her mascara was dramatically smudged beneath her eyes, a deliberate cosmetic choice designed to make her look fragile, exhausted, and utterly broken. Patricia was sitting right beside her, gently stroking her hair with a deeply concerned expression that could have easily won an acting award. "It is just so incredibly hard, you guys." Brittany sniffled to the camera, dabbing her completely dry eyes with a pristine linen napkin. "I'm trying to be supportive. I really am trying my best. But my sister knows I am grieving my canceled engagement, and she is practically forcing me to be her bridesmaid, just to rub her perfect relationship in my face. It feels so cruel and unnecessary." I walked closer and caught a glimpse of the chat scrolling rapidly across her glowing screen. The comments from her followers were incredibly vicious and entirely based on a fabricated narrative. People were calling me a narcissist, a toxic sibling, and an insecure bridezilla who could not stand sharing the spotlight. My mother leaned into the frame, shaking her head sadly for the audience. "We are just taking it one day at a time," Patricia told the viewers with a heavy sigh. "Families should protect each other, not tear each other down for personal glory." As a crisis public relations executive, I found their little performance almost insulting. In my line of work, we call this a preemptive victim narrative. It is a cheap, transparent manipulation tactic used by guilty parties to control public perception before the truth comes out. I did not storm over and demand they turn off the camera. I did not cover my face, yell, or act ashamed. Instead, I walked right up to the booth, pulled out a heavy oak chair, and sat down directly across from the lens. Brittany gasped softly, her eyes widening in genuine panic for a fraction of a second before she remembered she was broadcasting live. "Oh, Abby is here," she whispered to the camera, shrinking back into our mother's shoulder like a frightened child. I smiled warmly, completely ignoring the phone and the thousands of people currently dissecting my appearance. I looked directly into my mother's eyes, keeping my posture perfectly straight. "Mother, we need to discuss your email to the senior events director at the Grand Oak Estate." Patricia's hand froze instantly in Brittany's hair. The maternal, sorrowful expression on her face cracked right down the middle, replaced by a flash of genuine, unadulterated alarm. She clearly had not expected me to find out about her sabotage attempt so quickly, let alone bring it up while Brittany was broadcasting live to the internet. "I am not sure what you are talking about." "Abigail." Patricia lied smoothly, rapidly, attempting to recover her composure. "We are in the middle of talking to Brittany's online support group. Can you not see your sister is in profound distress right now? Please have some basic empathy." "I see that she is putting on a lovely show," I replied, keeping my voice bright, conversational, and completely devoid of the anger she was trying to provoke. "But I am much more interested in the official contract modification request you submitted exactly 1 hour ago. The one where you claimed my wedding was indefinitely postponed due to tragic family circumstances." Brittany stopped crying instantly. She looked at our mother in visible confusion, clearly unaware of this specific logistical plan. Patricia had acted alone, assuming she could secure the luxury venue first and present it to Brittany as a surprise later. Now the truth was hanging heavily in the air, captured perfectly on the live stream for all her loyal followers to hear. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished wooden table, never breaking eye contact with Patricia. "You demanded my $80,000 reservation be transferred to Brittany, so she could host a single and fabulous empowerment gala. I just want to know if you honestly believed the estate management would hand over a legally binding commercial contract to a woman who is not even on the billing account. Patricia stared at me for a long, heavy second before her survival instincts kicked in. Instead of looking ashamed, she straightened her posture, let out a long theatrical sigh, and turned her attention directly back to the glowing screen of Brittany's phone. She was pivoting the narrative in real time, shifting from caught saboteur to deeply concerned matriarch. "Listen to me, you guys," Patricia said to the camera, her voice dripping with fake maternal exhaustion. "This is exactly what I mean. Abigail always tries to make me look like the villain when I am only trying to protect her from her own disastrous choices." She looked back at me, her eyes narrowing with malicious intent. "Yes, Abigail. I emailed the venue. I did it because someone in this family has to live in reality." Brittany leaned closer to the phone, ensuring her perfectly smudged mascara was still in frame. "What do you mean, Mom?" she asked innocently, playing her role to perfection. Patricia gently patted Brittany's hand before directing a condescending glare across the table at me. "I mean that your sister is living in a complete fantasy world. The Grand Oak Estate costs $80,000 a night. That is not a secret. It is a premier luxury venue reserved for successful people, not someone who works a little PR job, answering phones and writing apology emails for local businesses." I kept my face completely impassive, though inside I was marveling at her ignorance. She legitimately believed I was still an entry-level assistant. She had never bothered to ask about my career progression, so she had no idea that my little PR job involved managing multi-million-dollar crisis campaigns for Fortune 500 companies. Patricia continued her public assassination of my character, her voice growing louder and more confident as she noticed the supportive comments flooding the live stream. "You cannot afford that venue, Abigail. We all know you cannot. You are financially irresponsible, and you are completely out of your depth. I was actually trying to do you a massive favor. Do you have any idea how humiliating it would be for our family when your final payment bounces? I was trying to save us from the absolute embarrassment of a canceled check." The chat on the live stream was moving at lightning speed now. Brittany's followers were eating up every single word. They were calling me a fraud, a wannabe socialite, and a pathetic liar, trying to live beyond my means. One comment even suggested I was trying to trap my fiancé Liam into paying for a wedding I could not afford by transferring the venue to Brittany. Patricia explained to her digital audience, "I was ensuring the deposit did not go to waste. Brittany has genuine sponsors and a large following. She could easily host a beautiful sponsored empowerment gala there. It makes perfect financial sense. But Abigail is so incredibly selfish and obsessed with appearing wealthy that she would rather let the venue cancel on her than admit she is broke." Brittany let out a soft, dramatic sob. "I just wanted something positive to come out of this horrible month," she whispered to the camera. "I would have even invited Abby to the gala, but she just wants to ruin everything for me." I slowly took a sip of the ice water the waiter had dropped off moments before. The coolness grounded me. Patricia was absolutely relishing this moment. She thought she had effectively backed me into a corner where any defensive response would just make me look like a hysterical defensive child. She was trying to strip away my professional credibility and my financial independence in front of 30,000 strangers. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, placing the water glass down on the table with a soft clink, because claiming I am going to bounce a check is a very bold statement coming from a woman who just tried to steal my $5,000 deposit to buy a sapphire blue evening gown. Patricia's jaw tightened. She hated when I remained calm. She needed me to yell so she could prove her point to the audience. She leaned aggressively over the table, her voice dropping the fake sweetness and taking on a harsh, venomous edge. "Do not play games with me, Abigail. You do not have that kind of money. You have never had that kind of money. You live in a cheap apartment and you work a dead-end job. You are a financial disaster waiting to happen, and I will not let you drag Liam or this family down into your mess." I smiled slightly, a cold, calculated expression that made Patricia briefly falter. "And what exactly makes you think I am a financial disaster, Mother?" Patricia smirked, feeling completely triumphant, unaware that she was about to walk right into my trap. "Because I know exactly what your credit looks like," she snapped. I froze. My heart skipped a single beat, not out of fear, but out of sheer terrifying realization. I had zero debt. I paid my corporate and personal credit cards in full every single month. My credit score was pristine, guarded fiercely by the wealth management firm that handled my accounts. There was absolutely no legitimate way my mother could know what my credit looked like, and there was certainly no reason she would think it was in ruins. Unless she had done something highly illegal. I leaned back in my heavy oak chair, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. "Is that right? And how exactly would you have any insight into my personal financial records?" Patricia scoffed, waving her hand dismissively while glancing at the live stream to make sure her audience was still engaged. "Oh, please, Abigail, do not play the innocent victim here. The bank sends the collection notices directly to my house. You have been delinquent for 3 straight months. If it were not for me managing the mail and hiding it, your fiancé would have found out about your little secret a long time ago." Delinquent notices. Sent to her house. The pieces of the puzzle began snapping together with sickening clarity. I had not lived at my mother's house in over a decade. I had never registered a single financial document to her address. I looked over at my sister. Brittany was sitting next to Patricia, suddenly looking extremely nervous. Her hand was gripping the edge of the marble table so tightly her knuckles were white. "Mom, maybe we should not talk about this on the internet," Brittany murmured, her eyes darting frantically toward the glowing phone screen. But Patricia was entirely too drunk on the digital validation of 30,000 strangers. She was determined to prove my incompetence to the world. "Nonsense," Patricia declared loudly, swatting Brittany's hand away. "People need to know the truth about who is actually causing the drama in this family. They need to know why we have to protect the venue deposit. Your sister has an $80,000 debt weighing her down. She bought a luxury vehicle she clearly could not afford, and now she is dodging the collections agency like a common criminal." I stared at the sleek silver key fob sitting next to Brittany's coffee cup. The unmistakable emblem of a Mercedes-Benz gleamed under the warm cafe lights. Brittany had purchased a brand new, fully loaded SUV late last year, constantly bragging about her influencer sponsorships paying for it. I looked back at Patricia, letting my crisis management training take complete control. My voice was no longer that of a defensive daughter, it was the voice of an interrogator. "An $80,000 debt," I repeated slowly, leaning forward to ensure the phone's microphone picked up every single syllable. "You mean the auto loan for Brittany's Mercedes?" Patricia rolled her eyes, oblivious to the trap. "Yes, obviously. The car you just had to have but could not pay for." I locked my eyes entirely on the camera lens. "Let me get this absolutely straight, Mother. You are telling 30,000 people right now that I took out an $80,000 auto loan for a car that Brittany drives every single day, a car that is registered exclusively in Brittany's name. How exactly did I manage to do that without ever stepping foot in a dealership?" Patricia huffed in extreme annoyance, completely blind to the legal noose she was tightening around her own neck. "You used your social security number, Abigail. Do not act stupid. You know Brittany did not have the credit history for a luxury vehicle. I had to use your information to push the application through the dealership financing department. You are her older sister. It is your absolute obligation to help her build her brand. It was a simple family favor, and now you are ruining her credit by not paying the monthly installments." The cafe seemed to go dead silent. Even the barista behind the counter stopped steaming milk. On the screen, the rapid-fire stream of comments suddenly halted. Then a second later, the chat exploded in a completely different direction. The followers who had been defending my mother just seconds ago were now typing furiously. The words "fraud, felony, identity theft," and "call the police" began flooding the screen. Brittany stared at the chat, her mouth dropping open in sheer horror as she realized what our mother had just explicitly confessed to on a live public broadcast. I did not yell. I did not flip the table or demand an apology. I simply smiled. It was a cold, absolute smile that finally made the blood drain entirely from Patricia's face. Thank you for clarifying that for the record, Mother, I said softly. I reached across the table, grabbed Brittany's phone, and confidently tapped the end broadcast button. The screen went completely black. I stood up from the velvet booth and smoothed the wrinkles from my skirt. I looked down at the two women who genuinely thought they could destroy me. Enjoy the coffee, I told them, my voice echoing with chilling finality. Because you are going to need the energy for what comes next. I turned on my heel and walked out of the French cafe, leaving my mother and sister sitting in stunned, terrified silence. The first domino had just fallen, and I was about to call Jamal to burn the rest of their world to the ground. I walked out into this brisk Chicago afternoon, the adrenaline coursing through my veins, entirely replacing the need for caffeine. The revelation of the Social Security fraud had fundamentally changed the stakes. This was no longer just petty family wedding drama. It was a felony. And Patricia had admitted to it on a live broadcast. My mother had always operated under the assumption that I was weak, pliant, and desperate for her validation. It was time she learned exactly what I did for a living. I caught a cab back to the gleaming glass skyscraper that housed my crisis public relations firm. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor gave me exactly 2 minutes to formulate my counteroffensive. The moment the polished steel doors opened to reveal my company's sleek reception area, I was no longer Abigail, the disappointed daughter. I was Abigail, the CEO, and my family had just become my newest hostile crisis account. I strode past the reception desk, giving a brief nod to my assistant before locking the heavy oak door of my corner office behind me. I dropped my designer tote bag onto the leather sofa and immediately powered up my triple-monitor workstation. For years, I had quietly observed Brittany's reckless behavior, mentally cataloging her mistakes simply out of a habit born from my profession. I had never intended to weaponize those observations until today. Brittany had meticulously crafted an online persona as the innocent, heartbroken victim whose fiancé had callously abandoned her weeks before their wedding. She had monetized her grief, gaining thousands of sympathetic followers and securing lucrative brand deals based on her supposed trauma. But I knew the actual truth. I had the truth sitting in a secure, encrypted folder on my private server. 3 weeks ago, her former fiancé had accidentally forwarded me a string of text messages and time-stamped photos. They clearly documented Brittany's 6-month-long affair with her gym's head personal trainer. The evidence was irrefutable. Hotel receipts, explicit texts, and ring camera footage of the trainer leaving her apartment at 3 in the morning while her fiancé was working night shifts at the hospital. I had kept quiet at the time, not wanting to involve myself in her messy life. But since Patricia and Brittany had decided to launch a smear campaign against my character and my financial stability to 30,000 people, all bets were officially off. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. I compiled the digital dossier into a clean, easy-to-read PDF format. I drafted a short, punchy summary of the affair, deliberately using the aggressive, sensational tone favored by digital media outlets. I utilized a secure, untraceable VPN and an encrypted email service to send the dossier anonymously to the editors of Chicago's top 3 gossip blogs and local lifestyle digital magazines. These were the exact outlets Brittany desperately tried to court for her influencer career. Within minutes, the emails were sent. The truth was out there, completely out of my hands and entirely in the brutal arena of public opinion. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and grabbed my phone to make the next critical move. I dialed Jamal's private number. He picked up on the second ring. "I assume the cafe meeting went well?" Jamal answered, his deep voice radiating professional amusement. "She admitted to using my social security number to co-sign Brittany's auto loan," I stated flatly. She confessed to it on a live Instagram broadcast with over 30,000 viewers. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a low, appreciative chuckle. "Good Lord, your mother is a prosecutor's absolute dream. Please tell me you recorded it." "I did not have to," I replied, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city skyline. 30,000 people witnessed it. I am certain at least 50 of them screen-recorded it the second the words left her mouth. The internet never forgets. Excellent, Jamal said, his tone shifting into rapid-fire legal mode. We have the leverage for the fraud case. But what about the venue situation? Have you decided how you want to handle the contract modification request she sent to the Grand Oak Estate? I turned away from the window, a cold smile forming on my lips. Yes. It is time to initiate Plan B. Let her think she successfully stole the venue. I want her to believe she has entirely ruined my wedding day, right up until the very last second. Jamal paused, understanding the sheer gravity of what I was asking. You realize if we execute Plan B, it is irreversible. The financial and legal trap will be completely set. If she walks into that venue on your wedding day attempting to host a party for Brittany, she will not just be embarrassed. She will be legally destroyed. I know, I said, my voice steady and resolute. Draft the final documents. I am heading to the bank now to freeze the credit accounts. Consider it done, Jamal replied before disconnecting the call. The plan was in motion. Patricia had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. She was about to find out exactly how massive my world truly was. I grabbed my blazer, ready to sever the final financial ties that bound me to her toxic grip. I spent the rest of the afternoon fortifying my financial vault. I did not shed a single tear over the revelation of my mother's betrayal. Instead, I operated with the clinical precision of a surgeon excising a malignant tumor. I dialed the private line of my wealth management advisor, a brilliant financial strategist named Marcus, who had overseen my corporate portfolio for the last 5 years. He was the only person besides my accountant who knew the true extent of my net worth, and he had strict standing orders regarding my family. Marcus, I said the moment he answered, I need you to initiate a total lockdown on my personal credit profile. Do not touch the corporate accounts, but I need a hard freeze on my individual social security number across all 3 major credit bureaus immediately. Marcus did not hesitate or ask for an explanation. He had dealt with high net worth clients long enough to know when to execute orders quickly. Consider it done, Abigail. Should I also run a comprehensive credit report to check for unauthorized activity? Yes, I replied, my voice steady. Look specifically for an auto loan originating late last year for a luxury vehicle. Flag it as fraudulent and formally dispute it. My mother explicitly confessed to identity theft today, so I want the paper trail bulletproof. I could hear the rapid clicking of his keyboard through the phone. I will have the fraud affidavits prepared and securely emailed to you within the hour. By tomorrow morning, anyone attempting to use your credit profile will trigger a massive fraud alert, and any existing loans tied to that specific social security number will immediately default if they attempt to restructure the financing. Perfect, I said. Send the documents to Jamal. He is handling the legal strategy. I disconnected the call and turned my attention to the secure email Jamal had just sent me. The subject line simply read, Plan B execution documents. I opened the encrypted attachment and began reading through the dense legal jargon. It was a masterpiece of corporate maneuvering. Jamal had structured the trap so flawlessly that Patricia would not realize she was in the jaws of a snare until it snapped completely shut. I printed the document, signed my name in sharp, decisive strokes, and scanned them back to Jamal's secure server. The documents established a series of legal barriers that would make my mother's attempt to hijack the Grand Oak Estate not just embarrassing, but a verifiable federal offense. The trap involved a very specific clause regarding commercial property ownership and unauthorized contract modifications, but I kept the exact details entirely to myself. Not even Liam knew the full extent of the legal landmine I had just planted. This was the beauty of Plan B. It relied entirely on Patricia's arrogance. She genuinely believed she had successfully outsmarted me and secured the venue for Brittany. She would undoubtedly proceed with her plans for the single and fabulous gala, completely unaware that the ground she was walking on had already been sold out from under her. I spent the next few days in a state of hyper-focused calm. I attended the final catering tastings with Liam, finalized the floral arrangements, and confirmed the string quartet's playlist, all while knowing my mother was secretly making her own alternate arrangements for the very same venue. Liam noticed my unusually serene demeanor, but did not question it. He knew my family was difficult and he trusted my ability to handle them. He had seen me navigate massive corporate crises, so he assumed I was simply applying that same detached professionalism to my mother's latest temper tantrum. As the week progressed, my phone remained suspiciously silent. Patricia did not call to berate me, and Brittany did not text me any passive-aggressive complaints. They were operating in total secrecy, clearly convinced they had won the war. They thought they had broken me financially and emotionally in that cafe, leaving me too ashamed to fight back. They were expecting me to quietly cancel the wedding and disappear. They had no idea that I was simply waiting for the perfect moment to pull the trigger. The silence was not a surrender. It was the calm before the absolute devastation. I had locked down my financial vault, secured the legal documents, and set the trap. Now all I had to do was wait for them to walk right into it at the rehearsal dinner. The digital explosion happened on Thursday morning, precisely 48 hours before my rehearsal dinner. I was sitting at my kitchen island, sipping a black espresso and reviewing the final catering headcount, when my private phone buzzed. It was a Google alert I had set up for Brittany's name. I tapped the notification and watched as the internet completely turned on my sister. The first outlet to publish the dossier was Chicago Scene, a notoriously ruthless local gossip blog. The headline was plastered across their homepage in bold red letters. The single and fabulous fraud local influencer fakes heartbreak after being caught cheating with trainer. They had published the screenshots of her explicit texts and the time-stamped ring camera footage. Within an hour, 2 other major digital magazines picked up the story, adding their own commentary on how she had scammed her followers into buying her sponsored sympathy merchandise. I opened Instagram and navigated to Brittany's public profile. The shift in public opinion was instantaneous and brutal. The thousands of followers who had been sending her heart emojis and defending her against me just days ago were now absolutely furious. Her comment sections were flooded with thousands of angry messages. People were demanding refunds for the products she had promoted using her fake sob story. They called her a hypocrite, a scammer, and a manipulative liar. Several brands she had partnered with immediately released statements distancing themselves from her, citing breaches of morality clauses in their contracts. My personal phone began vibrating aggressively against the granite countertop. It was a barrage of text messages from Brittany arriving in rapid succession. The messages were practically incoherent with rage. "You ruined my life. How could you do this to me? I know it was you. Everyone is canceling me. You are a monster. Mom is going to make you pay for this." I read the texts with absolute emotional detachment. I felt no guilt. Brittany had built her entire online persona on a foundation of lies, actively using me as a scapegoat to deflect from her own terrible choices. She and Patricia had gleefully tried to destroy my reputation and my financial standing in front of 30,000 people. All I had done was provide the internet with the unvarnished truth. As a public relations expert, I knew that the truth was the only defense against a fabricated smear campaign. I did not reply to a single message. Engaging with her would only give her ammunition and feed her victim complex. I simply swiped the notification away and took another sip of my espresso. The PR war was definitively won. My reputation was completely insulated, and Brittany's carefully constructed false narrative had collapsed entirely under its own weight. However, I also knew exactly how my mother operated. Patricia did not understand accountability. In her mind, exposing the truth was a far greater crime than committing the initial betrayal. By destroying Brittany's influencer career, I had publicly humiliated Patricia's golden child. I had proven that I was not the weak, defenseless target she believed me to be. This would not cause Patricia to reflect on her actions or apologize. It would only enrage her further. I knew Patricia would demand retribution, and she would want to exact it in the most public, damaging way possible. She needed an audience to validate her anger. She needed to reassert her dominance and prove that she still held the ultimate power over the family narrative. And the perfect stage for her retaliation was already set. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Friday night, and it was going to be the largest gathering of our extended family and Liam's relatives before the actual wedding. I called Jamal to confirm the final details for Friday evening. "I need you at the rehearsal dinner," I told him, skipping any pleasantries. The blogs just dropped the cheating dossier. My mother is going to be completely unhinged. She will use the dinner to launch a massive counterattack. Jamal chuckled, the sound deep and resonant over the line. I saw the articles. Brilliant execution, Abigail. You completely dismantled her platform. I already have the financial presentation finalized and loaded onto a secure tablet. If Patricia tries to weaponize the family against you, I am ready to drop the hammer. Make sure Liam's parents are seated near the front, I instructed. They need to hear exactly what kind of people they are dealing with before the wedding. Patricia relies on the illusion of respectability. We are going to strip that away entirely. Consider it handled, Jamal promised. Get some rest. Tomorrow night is going to be incredibly entertaining. I hung up the phone, feeling a profound sense of calm settling over me. The anxiety that had plagued me for years whenever I had to face my family was completely gone. I was no longer afraid of my mother's theatrical tantrums or her attempts to humiliate me. I had armed myself with the truth, legal leverage, and allies who genuinely supported me. Patricia thought she was walking into the rehearsal dinner to orchestrate my final defeat. She had no idea she was walking straight into an ambush designed to expose her decades of financial manipulation to the entire extended family. Friday evening arrived, bringing with it a tense electric energy. Liam and I had rented the private dining room of a historic steakhouse downtown for our rehearsal dinner. The ambiance was intimate and sophisticated, featuring dim lighting, exposed brick walls, and long mahogany tables decorated with low arrangements of white orchids. We had purposely kept the guest list small, inviting only the bridal party, Liam's immediate family, and a few of my closest friends. I had explicitly not invited Patricia or Brittany. After the stunt they pulled at the cafe, and the subsequent digital fallout, their presence was entirely unwelcome. The evening began smoothly. We were halfway through the appetizer course, and Liam's father was just raising his glass to propose a toast when the heavy wooden double doors of the private dining room suddenly swung open. Patricia marched into the room, flanked by Brittany and my stepdad Richard. But they had not come alone. Patricia had rallied her troops. Trailing behind her were my Aunt Diane, Uncle George, and three of my older cousins, all of whom had historically served as Patricia's personal echo chamber. They moved as a pack, aggressively invading the quiet elegance of the space. Brittany looked disheveled, her eyes red and puffy, clearly continuing her performance as the devastated victim. Patricia, however, looked ready for war. She was dressed in an inappropriately formal black gown, her jaw set in a rigid line of righteous indignation. The quiet chatter in the dining room died instantly. Liam placed his hand firmly over mine on the table, his posture stiffening defensively. He knew exactly what this was. "Well," Patricia announced, her voice booming across the silent room, "I suppose it is true what they say. Money changes people so much that they forget where they came from. They even forget to invite their own mother to the rehearsal dinner." Aunt Diane immediately chimed in, shaking her head disapprovingly at me. "Honestly, Abigail, we are appalled. We always knew you were self-centered, but completely isolating your mother and sister during a family crisis is a new low even for you." I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I simply placed my linen napkin on the table and looked at the uninvited group. "Mother, this is a private event. You were not invited because you explicitly told me you refused to participate in my wedding. I am merely honoring your request." Patricia scoffed, pressing a hand to her chest, in a gesture of profound wounded innocence. She immediately pivoted, directing her attention entirely toward Liam's parents, who were seated across the table, looking bewildered. "Mr. and Mrs. Davis," Patricia said, stepping closer to them, her voice trembling with perfectly manufactured sorrow. "I am so deeply sorry to interrupt your evening, but you need to know the truth about the woman your son is marrying. We have tried to keep her behavior quiet to protect the family reputation, but she has gone too far." Liam's mother, a kind and soft-spoken retired teacher, looked incredibly uncomfortable. "Patricia, please," she murmured gently. "Tonight is supposed to be a celebration for Liam and Abigail. Cannot whatever this is wait until after the wedding?" "It absolutely cannot," Patricia insisted loudly, gesturing dramatically toward Brittany. "Abigail is deliberately destroying this family over money. She is elitist, cruel, and she lacks basic human empathy. She leaked those horrible lies about Brittany to the internet just to ruin her career. She is punishing her own sister for being in pain. Brittany let out a loud, pathetic sob, burying her face in Uncle George's shoulder. He patted her back awkwardly, glaring aggressively at me. "Your sister is practically suicidal," Abigail George growled. "And you are sitting here drinking champagne and showing off. You always thought you were better than us." Patricia continued her tirade to Liam's parents, growing more frantic and impassioned. "She thinks because she has a fancy job she can treat us like garbage. She even tried to steal the venue deposit from us to fund her lavish lifestyle. She is completely financially irresponsible, and when the money runs out, she will turn on Liam just like she turned on us." The extended family murmured their agreement, forming a solid wall of judgment. They were attempting to stage a public intervention designed to intimidate me into compliance and humiliate me in front of my future in-laws. Patricia wanted me to break down, apologize, and beg for their forgiveness right there in the restaurant. She wanted to re-establish her dominance. I looked at Liam. He did not look embarrassed or doubtful. He looked absolutely furious on my behalf. He started to push his chair back to intervene, but Jamal, who was seated to his left, placed a firm hand on his brother's arm. Jamal caught my eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "Let them dig the hole a little deeper," Jamal's expression seemed to say. I leaned back in my chair, allowing Patricia to completely exhaust her manufactured outrage. I watched as she painted me as a financial disaster, a cruel sibling, and an elitist snob. She was playing every single card, she had completely unaware that she was laying the groundwork for her own absolute destruction. When she finally paused to take a breath, the room was thick with tension. It was the exact moment Jamal stood up. Before Jamal could utter a single word, Patricia panicked at the sight of someone else commanding the room. She snatched a heavy silver butter knife from the table and began violently striking it against her crystal wine glass. The sharp, piercing sound cut through the heavy silence of the private dining room. She held her glass high, her eyes wide, with a manic desperation to keep the spotlight entirely on herself. "I would like to propose a toast," Patricia announced loudly, her voice echoing off the exposed brick walls. Jamal paused. He looked at the butter knife, then at Patricia, and finally at me. A slow, incredibly dangerous smile spread across his face. With a graceful, sweeping gesture of his hand, he politely yielded the floor and sat back down. He was giving her enough rope to hang herself, and she was eagerly tying the knot. Patricia turned her attention entirely to Liam's family. She closed her eyes for a brief theatrical second, squeezing out a single perfectly timed tear that rolled down her cheek. "Mr. and Mrs. Davis," she began, her voice quivering with expertly manufactured emotion, "I want to sincerely apologize to you both. You raised a wonderful son in Liam, and you brought him into our family with open arms. You did not deserve to be dragged into this ugliness tonight. But as a mother, I have a sacred duty to protect my children, even from each other." Brittany let out another breathy sob, burying her face in a linen napkin. Uncle George rubbed her shoulder, aggressively glaring daggers at me from across the room. For years, Patricia continued, her tone shifting from sorrowful to a sharp, passive-aggressive reprimand. For years, I have watched Abigail bully her younger sister. I watched her use her corporate job to make us feel inferior. But leaking those disgusting fabricated lies to the internet this week, trying to destroy Brittany's career while she is already grieving a broken engagement, that was the ultimate betrayal. It was abusive. And I will not stand by and watch my eldest daughter tear this family apart just to stroke her own massive ego. The room was dead silent, save for the dramatic sniffling coming from my sister. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. The audacity of her speech was almost impressive. She was demanding accountability for a leak that only contained the absolute truth while entirely ignoring the felonies she had committed just days prior. Patricia raised her glass slightly higher, fixing her gaze entirely on me. Her eyes were hard, completely devoid of any maternal warmth. "But we are a family of forgiveness," Patricia declared, her voice ringing with false magnanimity. "We believe in second chances. Abigail, you can fix this. You can heal this family tonight. But it requires you to finally be selfless. She took a deep breath, preparing to deliver her ultimate demand. I demand that you stand up right now and publicly apologize to your sister in front of everyone here, and to make amends for the immense emotional and financial damage you have caused her this week, you are going to transfer the reservation for the Grand Oak Estate to her name. Tomorrow night, Brittany will host her empowerment gala to salvage her brand, and you will postpone your wedding until you learn how to treat your family with basic respect. The audacity of the demand hit the room like a shockwave. Liam tightened his grip on my hand, his jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. But the real noise came from Patricia's personal echo chamber. Aunt Diane nodded vigorously, her cheap jewelry clanking as she leaned forward. "She is right, Abigail," Diane said loudly. "It is the absolute least you can do after the stunt you pulled online. Be the bigger person for once in your life." Uncle George immediately chimed in, his voice gruff and demanding. "Hand over the venue, kid. You owe your sister. You owe your mother. Stop acting like a spoiled brat and do the right thing for your blood." My cousins, who had been drinking steadily since they barged in, started muttering their agreement. "Just give her the venue," Abby, one of them, said loudly. "You can get married in a courthouse. Brittany actually needs the fancy party right now." The murmurs of agreement rippled through the uninvited guests. They were forming a united front using peer pressure and public humiliation to force me into submission. Patricia stood at the head of the table, her wineglass still raised, a triumphant smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. She genuinely believed she had checkmated me. She thought that, surrounded by Liam's family and the crushing weight of public expectation, I would break down, cry, and surrender the $80,000 venue just to make the nightmare stop. I looked around the room. I looked at the angry faces of my aunt and uncle, the fake tears of my sister, and the smug, victorious expression of my mother. I did not feel small. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical anticipation. I slowly placed my water glass down on the mahogany table. I did not stand up. I did not apologize. Instead, I simply turned my head and looked at Jamal. Jamal adjusted his impeccably tailored suit jacket, picked up a sleek black tablet from the table, and finally stood up for real. The time for Patricia's theatrical lies was over. It was time for the forensic accounting to begin. Jamal smoothed the lapels of his midnight blue bespoke suit. He moved with the effortless authority of a man who destroyed hostile corporate boards for a living. He walked past my chair, giving my shoulder a brief, reassuring squeeze, and positioned himself at the head of the table directly next to Patricia. He did not snatch the silver butter knife or raise his voice. He simply commanded the space. Patricia Jamal began, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that instantly swallowed the angry murmurs of the room. That was an incredibly moving speech. And I want to personally thank you for bringing up the topic of finances accountability and the profound sacrifices we make for the people we love. Patricia looked momentarily confused. She lowered her crystal wineglass, her triumphant smirk faltering slightly as she tried to read Jamal's expression. She assumed in her profound arrogance that Liam's older brother was about to agree with her assessment of my character. "Well," Patricia stammered, adjusting her posture and attempting to regain her authoritative tone, "I am just trying to do what is best for the girls. It is a mother's heavy burden to ensure fairness in the family." Jamal smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant smile that did not reach his eyes. "Fairness is a beautiful concept," Jamal agreed smoothly, pacing slowly behind her chair. "But as a corporate attorney, I find that fairness is best demonstrated through transparency, especially financial transparency." Jamal pulled a sleek black tablet from his interior jacket pocket. He tapped the screen twice. A second later, the large flat-screen monitor mounted on the exposed brick wall behind Patricia flared to life. The restaurant used it for corporate retreats and presentation dinners, and Jamal had effortlessly synced his device to the network before the appetizer course even arrived. The screen displayed a crisp, perfectly formatted presentation slide. The title read in bold black lettering, "Forensic Accounting Analysis of the Family Wedding Fund." A collective gasp rippled through the extended family. Aunt Diane and Uncle George exchanged nervous, suspicious glances. 2 years ago, when Liam and I first got engaged, Patricia had insisted on setting up a joint family wedding fund. She claimed it was a traditional way for the extended family to pool resources and contribute to the celebration. My aunts, uncles, and even my grandparents had deposited generous sums of money into that specific account. Patricia was the sole trustee, swearing she would manage it meticulously to pay for the floral arrangements, the catering, and the rehearsal dinner we were currently attending. I had never asked for their money, but Patricia used the fund's existence as emotional leverage to control every minor detail of the wedding planning. Jamal pressed a button on his tablet and the slide transitioned. When Abigail and Liam asked me to review the vendor contracts for the wedding, Jamal explained his cadence, rhythmic and hypnotic like a prosecutor delivering an opening statement. I noticed a few glaring irregularities regarding the payment sources, so I took the liberty of conducting a comprehensive audit of the family wedding fund. As you can see on the screen, the total contributions from the extended family amounted to exactly $35,000. Jamal gestured to the colorful pie chart illuminating the dim room. However, the current balance of that account is exactly $412. Aunt Diane stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Wait a minute," Diane interrupted, her voice shrill with sudden panic. "George and I put $5,000 into that account just 3 months ago. Where did the money go? Did Abigail spend it all on that ridiculous designer dress?" Jamal did not miss a beat. He swiped to the next slide, revealing a highly detailed ledger of bank transfers. "That is an excellent question," Diane, Jamal said politely. "Let us look at the disbursement history. As you can see, Abigail has not withdrawn a single cent from this account. In fact, Abigail has paid for 90% of this wedding out of her own private business accounts." Jamal pointed a long, elegant finger at the illuminated screen. The funds were actually depleted through 42 separate wire transfers over the past 6 months, all authorized by the account's sole trustee, Patricia. And where did those transfers go? Jamal tapped his tablet one final time. The screen filled with high-resolution images of banking statements highlighting the destination routing numbers in bright yellow. $20,000 was transferred directly to American Express and Chase Bank, specifically to pay off the maxed-out delinquent credit cards belonging to Brittany. The private dining room erupted. The united front. Patricia had spent the last 20 minutes building completely shattered into tiny pieces. Uncle George turned purple with rage. Brittany shrank back in her chair, covering her face with her hands to hide from the furious stares of her relatives. Patricia stood frozen, the silver butter knife slipping from her fingers and clattering loudly against her porcelain plate. Her face was ashen, her eyes darting frantically around the room as the relatives who had just praised her began shouting angry demands for their money back. She had tried to humiliate me for being financially irresponsible, but Jamal had just mathematically proven to the entire family that Patricia was nothing more than a common embezzler. Jamal did not raise his voice over the explosion of shouting in the private dining room. He stood at the head of the mahogany table, his posture relaxed, observing the absolute chaos he had just unleashed. Uncle George leaned across the table, his face purple, demanding to know how Patricia could steal his $5,000 contribution to pay for Brittany's designer handbags. Aunt Diane was aggressively waving her linen napkin, shouting that she intended to press charges. Patricia was frantically shaking her head, trying to formulate a lie, but her usual silver tongue had completely failed her. She looked at me with wild, desperate eyes, expecting me to intervene and save her. I took a sip of water and watched her empire crumble. The sheer panic in her expression was incredibly satisfying to witness. After allowing the family to vent their initial outrage, Jamal gently tapped the edge of the table with his knuckles. The sharp, authoritative sound immediately commanded the room's attention. The shouting died down to angry mutters as the extended family turned back to Liam's older brother, realizing he was not finished. "Please," Jamal said smoothly, gesturing for everyone to take their seats. "Let us maintain some decorum. Besides, the embezzlement of the wedding fund is only the first item on tonight's agenda. There is still the matter of the luxury vehicle." Jamal closed his black tablet and reached into his leather briefcase resting on the chair next to him. He pulled out a thick manila folder stamped with red ink. Patricia swallowed hard, her eyes locking onto the folder with sudden primal terror. She knew exactly what it was. Jamal opened the folder and casually withdrew a stack of banking documents. He looked directly at my sister, who was currently trying to make herself as small as possible in her chair. Brittany. Jamal said, his tone entirely conversational. You have been driving a brand new fully loaded Mercedes-Benz SUV since last November. The retail price is roughly $80,000. Considering you are unemployed and your mother drained the family fund to pay off your maxed-out credit cards. The financing department at the dealership was naturally very curious about how you secured such a massive auto loan. Brittany opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Jamal did not wait for her answer. He turned his attention back to the extended family. Brittany secured the loan because Patricia used Abigail's social security number to co-sign the financial paperwork without her knowledge. Aunt Diane gasped loudly. Identity theft, she whispered in horror. Jamal nodded solemnly. Yes, Diane, felony identity theft. And an incredibly sloppy execution of it. However, Jamal continued pacing slowly toward Brittany's side of the table. Abigail was made aware of this fraudulent loan earlier this week. She immediately contacted the major credit bureaus and placed a hard security freeze on her social security number to prevent further criminal activity. Jamal stopped right next to Brittany's chair. When a primary cosigner freezes their credit profile and formally reports unauthorized activity, Jamal explained, his voice echoing in the silent room. The lending institution automatically triggers an internal audit. The bank financing your Mercedes conducted that audit yesterday. They discovered the fraud invalidated the terms of the loan and demanded immediate payment in full. Since you do not have $80,000 in cash lying around, the financing has officially defaulted. Jamal slid a white document across the mahogany table. It stopped right in front of Brittany's plate. It was a formal notice printed on bank letterhead with a bold red banner across the top. That is a notice of default and active repossession, Jamal stated coldly. The bank has already dispatched a recovery team. The tow truck is actively looking for your vehicle right now, Brittany. If you drove it here tonight, I highly suggest you remove your personal belongings from the cabin before the valet hands the keys over to the repo man. Brittany stared at the document as if it were a live grenade. Her hands began to shake violently. She looked up at Patricia, tears streaming down her face, no longer faking her distress. Mom, do something, she pleaded hysterically. They're going to take my car. How am I supposed to go anywhere? Patricia could not do anything. She was completely paralyzed by the evidence. The arrogant matriarch who had marched into the room demanding an $80,000 venue just 20 minutes ago was entirely gone. She was exposed in front of Liam's family, her betrayed relatives, and the bridal party. The extended family sat in stunned silence, absorbing the magnitude of the crimes committed. Uncle George looked at Patricia with disgust, realizing the woman he had defended all night was just a thief. He pushed his chair back, the wooden legs scraping harshly against the floor. He did not yell this time. His voice was dangerously quiet, laced with a profound sense of betrayal. You stole from your own family, Patricia. You lied to my face, took my money, and used it to fund a luxury lifestyle for a daughter who does not even have the decency to pay her own bills. Do not ever call my house again. Aunt Diane stood up next to him, her face flushed with deep embarrassment and anger. We came here tonight to support you because we believed your lies about Abigail. We thought she was being cruel. But you are the toxic one. You always have been. George is right. We are absolutely done with you. One by one, the extended family members who had confidently marched into the private dining room just 30 minutes ago began to gather their coats. They muttered apologies to Liam's parents as they walked past, completely ignoring Patricia and Brittany. The united front Patricia had weaponized against me was dissolving right in front of her eyes. She was losing her audience, her enablers, and her perceived moral high ground all at once. For a narcissist like my mother, public humiliation and the sudden loss of control were worse than any legal threat. As the last of her relatives walked out the heavy oak doors, something inside Patricia completely snapped. The mask of the sorrowful, victimized mother vanished entirely. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. She slammed both of her hands flat onto the mahogany table, leaning forward aggressively. "You think you are so brilliant, Abigail?" Patricia hissed, her voice vibrating with a feral, desperate rage. "You sit there with your smug little smile, using your fancy corporate lawyer to humiliate your own flesh and blood. You think because you froze a credit card and printed some bank statements that you have won. You think you are completely untouchable." I did not flinch. I kept my posture perfectly relaxed, watching her unravel with the clinical detachment of a spectator. "You want to play games and ruin your sister's life?" Patricia screamed, her voice echoing loudly in the now mostly empty dining room. "Fine, but do not ever underestimate me. You are not the only one who knows how to make a phone call and get things done. I told you I would protect Brittany from your selfishness, and I meant every single word." Liam shifted in his chair, his protective instincts flaring, but I placed a gentle hand on his knee to keep him seated. I wanted her to say it. I needed her to fully commit to her delusion on the record in front of all remaining witnesses. "What exactly are you talking about, Mother?" I asked, my voice calm and completely devoid of the panic she was desperately trying to provoke. Patricia threw her head back and let out a harsh, hysterical laugh. It was the sound of a woman completely unhinged by her own malice. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "I am talking about your precious wedding venue. Did you honestly think I was just going to accept your little email denial? I drove directly to the Grand Oak Estate this morning. I bypassed the automated systems you set up and walked right into the management office. I spoke face to face with the senior events director." She paused, her chest heaving as she savored what she believed was her ultimate victory. "I showed them my identification. I proved I was the mother of the bride. And then I officially terminated your wedding contract. I told them you had a complete mental breakdown and canceled the entire event." Brittany looked up from her tears, a sudden spark of malicious hope lighting up her puffy eyes. She sniffled, eager to hear how our mother had salvaged her ruined week. "And since the estate requires a massive cancellation fee," Patricia continued, her voice rising to a triumphant shriek, "I offered them a highly lucrative alternative. I paid an emergency premium in cash to override the system and transfer the entire reservation to Brittany. The paperwork is signed, the caterers are updated. Tomorrow night, this family will be celebrating Brittany's single and fabulous gala at the most exclusive estate in Illinois." Patricia slammed her fist on the table one last time, her eyes burning with a manic fire. She delivered her final vicious promise with absolute certainty. "You do not have a venue tomorrow. You have absolutely nothing. I took it all away from you." The private dining room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Liam's parents looked horrified by the sheer cruelty of her actions. Brittany actually smiled, a genuine selfish grin, completely forgetting about the repossession of her car in the face of this supposed victory. Jamal stood near the presentation screen, his arms casually crossed over his chest, hiding a deeply amused smirk. I looked at my mother. I looked at the frantic, desperate triumph shining in her eyes. I slowly reached out and picked up my crystal glass of red wine by the stem. I brought it to my lips, took a slow, measured sip, and let the rich flavor settle before gently placing the glass back down on the white linen tablecloth. "We will see about that," I replied softly. The morning of my wedding dawned crisp and bright, the Chicago sky a brilliant blue. I woke up in my penthouse apartment feeling completely rested, untouched by the chaotic threats my mother had hurled across the rehearsal dinner table the night before. Liam kissed my forehead before leaving to get ready with Jamal at a nearby hotel. I drank a cup of tea, packed my overnight bag, and ordered a private black car to take me to the Grand Oak Estate. The drive carried me away from the towering skyscrapers and into the sprawling countryside. The estate was breathtaking, sitting on pristine botanical gardens and featuring a beautiful historic stone mansion with wrought iron gates. It was the perfect setting for a flawless victory. My driver pulled up to the circular cobblestone driveway. I stepped out of the vehicle wearing a tailored silk pantsuit and carrying my designer tote bag. I did not look like a frantic bride whose venue had supposedly been stolen. I looked like an executive arriving to close a massive corporate acquisition. As I walked through the heavy glass double doors into the grand marble lobby, I immediately noticed the tension. A young, nervous front desk attendant stiffened when he saw me approach. He was clearly knew someone easily intimidated and bought. "Good morning," I said smoothly. "I am Abigail. I am heading up to the master bridal suite to begin my hair and makeup preparations." The young attendant swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically toward the grand sweeping staircase. "Miss Abigail," he stammered, his hands shaking as he adjusted his name tag. "I am so sorry, but the master bridal suite is currently occupied. The reservation was modified early this morning by a Mrs. Patricia. She insisted there was a family emergency and slipped me a large cash tip to override the digital lock system. She claimed she had official clearance." I did not raise my voice or threaten his job. I simply offered him a polite, understanding smile. "I see," I replied calmly. "Thank you for your honesty. You do not need to worry about the security override. I will handle it from here." I bypassed the front desk entirely and walked deliberately toward the grand staircase. The heavy oak steps absorbed the sound of my heels. Patricia had actually done it. She had utilized a combination of arrogance and cash bribes to physically occupy the most exclusive room. I reached the second-floor landing and walked down the plush, carpeted hallway. The double doors to the master bridal suite were propped wide open. Dance music was blaring from a portable speaker echoing aggressively through the elegant corridor. I stopped in the doorway and observed the absolute spectacle unfolding inside. The suite was massive, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the botanical gardens. Inside, Patricia was barking orders at two young, terrified catering assistants, demanding they set up a champagne tower for Brittany's empowerment gala. And then there was Brittany. My sister was standing in the center of the room admiring her reflection in an ornate gilded mirror. She was wearing a massive, heavily beaded white evening gown. It featured a sweetheart neckline, a corset bodice, and a trailing tulle skirt. It was not just an evening gown, it was unequivocally a wedding dress. She held a crystal flute filled with expensive champagne twirling around and posing for selfies, as if her car had not been marked for repossession 12 hours prior. The delusion was staggering. She genuinely believed she had successfully hijacked my wedding day. Patricia turned around to yell at another staff member and immediately spotted me standing quietly in the doorway. She froze, a massive, victorious grin spreading across her face. She practically vibrated with malicious joy. "Well," Patricia announced loudly, ensuring her voice carried over the thumping music. "Look who decided to show up. I told you last night that you had absolutely nothing, Abigail." The senior events director transferred the contract. This room, this venue, and this entire day belonged to Brittany. Brittany turned away from the mirror, taking a long sip of her champagne. She looked me up and down, her eyes full of spite. "You can stay and watch if you want, Abby," Brittany sneered. "Some of your guests are already arriving on the grounds outside. I am sure they will love my new dress. It is much better than that cheap lace thing you bought." I looked at my sister in her stolen white gown. I looked at my mother standing proudly in the center of the hijacked suite. I glanced out the large window, watching my invited guests beginning to mingle on the manicured lawns below. The trap was now fully loaded. All I needed to do was pull the final lever to end this charade. I did not scream. I did not drop my tote bag in shock, nor did I throw myself against the doorframe in a hysterical fit of tears. I stood perfectly still, letting Patricia savor the silence she mistook for my total defeat. She stood guard in the doorway, crossing her arms defensively, waiting for the inevitable meltdown. She was addicted to the drama, hungry for the moment I would beg her to let me have my wedding day back. Instead of crying, I smoothly raised my left arm and checked my watch. It was a vintage Cartier, understated but precise. We had exactly 2 hours before the string quartet was scheduled to begin playing in the botanical gardens. That was more than enough time for my security team to arrive and for Jamal to finalize the legal ambush. "I see," I said softly, my voice devoid of any panic or anger. I reached into my tote bag and retrieved my phone. Patricia watched me with narrowed eyes, her triumphant grin faltering slightly. She had expected a fight, not total apathy. "Who are you calling?" Patricia demanded, her voice tight with sudden suspicion. "Are you calling Liam to tell him the wedding is off? Because I already told the events director to update his family when they arrive." I did not answer her. I dialed the direct line of the private security firm I had contracted earlier in the week. The phone rang only once before the head of my security detail answered. "It is Abigail," I stated clearly, keeping my eyes locked on my mother. "We have an unauthorized occupation in the master bridal suite. Proceed with the containment protocol we discussed. Do not engage until the lawyer arrives." "Understood," the voice replied firmly. "We are moving into position now." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my bag. Patricia looked genuinely confused. She uncrossed her arms, leaning slightly forward. "What containment protocol? What are you talking about, Abigail? This suite is legally registered to Brittany now." I smiled, a small, cold curve of my lips. "As I said last night, Mother, we will see about that. In the meantime, I am going to get dressed in the secondary suite down the hall. Enjoy the champagne." I turned around and walked away without another word. I did not look back at my sister in her stolen white gown, nor did I engage with the frantic questions my mother started shouting after me. I simply walked down the plush carpeted hallway, the sound of my heels steady and unbothered. Patricia stood frozen in the doorway of the master suite, completely unsettled by my reaction. I had completely stripped away her power by refusing to react emotionally. She had hijacked an $80,000 venue, yet I was walking away to get dressed, as if nothing had happened. She was left standing in a hijacked room, totally unaware that it was rapidly becoming her prison. I reached the secondary suite at the end of the hallway and used my keycard to enter. Inside, my actual makeup artist and hairstylist were waiting, completely unfazed by the commotion down the hall. They had been briefed. They knew the assignment. I sat down in the styling chair, closed my eyes, and let them work their magic. Outside, the estate grounds were beginning to hum with activity. Through the large window of my suite, I could see the guests arriving and taking their seats on the white wooden chairs, arranged perfectly on the manicured lawn. The floral arch was heavily decorated with white roses and orchids. The afternoon sun cast a warm golden glow over the entire scene. Liam's family began arriving in small clusters, murmuring quietly to each other, clearly still disturbed by the explosive rehearsal dinner the night before. They took their seats on the groom's side of the aisle, casting wary glances toward the empty rows reserved for my family. Back in the master suite, Patricia's initial triumph was rapidly souring into severe anxiety. My calm departure had deeply unnerved her. She paced the length of the room, ignoring Brittany's continuous selfies, frantically trying to decipher my phone call. She kept opening the suite door, expecting to see hotel security coming to evict her, but the hallway remained completely empty. She did not realize that my security team was not dressed in hotel uniforms. They were dressed in dark suits, blending in perfectly with the early arriving guests, quietly taking up strategic positions around the perimeter of the estate and at the base of the grand staircase. The tension in the air was palpable, building with every passing minute as the clock ticked down to the ceremony. Patricia thought she had won the war by taking the room, completely ignorant of the fact that I had bought the entire battlefield. Down on the manicured lawns, the operation I had orchestrated was moving with silent, terrifying precision. From my vantage point on the second floor, I watched as 4 black SUVs pulled silently into the gravel service entrance at the back of the estate. The private security team I had contracted did not look like standard event bouncers or rent-a-cops. They were elite professionals, former military contractors, dressed in immaculate dark charcoal suits, with discreet earpieces and an air of absolute authority. They moved in perfect synchronization, fanning out across the sprawling property, with a clear, predetermined objective. 2 agents positioned themselves at the main wrought iron gates, quietly turning away any uninvited guests, local media, or rogue vendors who might have been called by my mother for her fake gala. 3 more agents stationed themselves at the perimeter of the botanical gardens, seamlessly blending into the background while keeping a sharp eye on the seated guests. But the most crucial part of their deployment was happening inside the mansion itself. I heard the soft, synchronized thud of heavy footsteps in the corridor outside my door. Two towering guards took up permanent posts at the top of the grand staircase, entirely blocking the only exit from the second floor down to the lobby. Two more guards marched silently down the hallway and planted themselves directly outside the heavy oak doors of the master bridal suite. Patricia and Brittany were now completely contained in their stolen room. They just did not know it yet. Right on schedule, a sleek black town car glided up the main cobblestone driveway, bypassing the valet line entirely. The rear door opened, and Jamal stepped out into the crisp afternoon sun. He looked magnificent, radiating an aura of absolute legal destruction in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. In his right hand, he carried a thick manila folder that looked heavy with consequence. Even from my second-floor window, I could clearly see the bold red ink stamped repeatedly across the front cover of the documents. These were not just standard vendor contracts or cease and desist letters. They were the finalized, legally binding commercial ownership papers for the Grand Oak Estate, officially registered under my private LLC alongside the emergency trespassing injunctions Jamal had aggressively pushed through the local magistrate that very morning. Jamal paused at the bottom of the grand staircase and looked up toward the large windows. He found me standing behind the glass, perfectly calm in my Vera Wang gown. Our eyes locked across the distance. He gave a single definitive nod, tapping the red stamped folder against his thigh. I nodded back. The trap was now fully armed and completely inescapable. The legal snare and the physical barricade were both in place. There was no going back, and looking at the empire I had secured, I felt absolutely no desire to stop what was coming. Down in the gardens, the atmosphere visibly shifted. The string quartet, seated beneath a massive weeping willow tree, finished tuning their instruments. They began playing a slow, elegant classical piece, the rich notes carrying on the breeze, signaling to the guests that the ceremony was about to commence. I watched as Liam took his place at the altar. He stood tall and confident, adjusting his silver cufflinks. He looked up at my window and smiled a silent message of unwavering support. He knew the storm was about to hit the moment I walked out, and he was completely ready to weather it by my side. Down the hall, the blaring dance music inside the master bridal suite suddenly cut off. The abrupt silence was deafening. I could hear the muffled sound of Patricia's frantic voice vibrating through the thick walls. The start of the string quartet outside had obviously alerted her that something was incredibly wrong with her master plan. She had confidently told the senior events director to cancel the wedding. She had paid a cash bribe. She had expected my guests to be turned away at the gates in confusion. She had expected me to be sobbing in a taxi heading back to Chicago. Instead, she was hearing the unmistakable, undeniable sounds of my wedding ceremony proceeding exactly as planned right beneath her window. I heard the heavy brass handle of the master suite door rattle loudly. Patricia was aggressively trying to open it to march out and demand the music stop. I knew exactly what she would find. She would pull that door open fully, expecting to exercise her usual dominance over the hotel staff, only to be met by a literal wall of broad-shouldered private security agents who were explicitly instructed not to let her leave the room until I gave the command. The snare had tightened completely. I turned away from the window, picked up my bridal bouquet of white orchids, and walked toward my suite door. It was time to go downstairs and spring the trap. The heavy oak doors of the master bridal suite swung open with violent force. Patricia stood in the threshold, her face flushed with frantic rage, fully intending to march down to the botanical gardens and demand the string quartet cease playing immediately. But her aggressive stride was instantly halted. She nearly collided with the broad, immovable chest of one of my private security agents. Two of them stood shoulder to shoulder, their dark suits forming a physical barrier across the hallway. They did not flinch, they did not speak, and they certainly did not move out of her way. "Excuse me," Patricia snapped, her voice shrill with indignation. She attempted to push past them, but the agent on the left simply raised a massive gloved hand, gently but firmly stopping her progress. "I am sorry, ma'am. the agent said, his voice flat and completely devoid of the deferential tone she usually commanded from hospitality staff. "You are required to remain in this suite until the bride has reached the altar." Patricia stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. "Required? Do you know who I am? I am the mother of the bride, and I officially own the contract for this venue. Now step aside before I have you both fired." The agent did not blink. His expression remained entirely neutral as he tapped the earpiece resting securely in his right ear. "We have our orders directly from the legal owner of this property, ma'am. Please step back inside the suite." Back inside the room, Brittany dropped her champagne flute. It shattered against the hardwood floor, the expensive liquid soaking into the hem of her stolen white gown. She rushed to the door, her eyes wide with sudden, terrifying realization. "Mom, what is happening? Why are they not letting us out?" Patricia was completely paralyzed. The reality of the situation was finally beginning to penetrate her absolute delusion. She looked at the immovable guards, then back at Brittany, her mind scrambling to comprehend how she had lost control so quickly and so completely. She had thought she was the puppet master, but she was just discovering she had been locked inside the toy box. Down in the gardens, I stood quietly in the grand foyer of the mansion, hidden from the view of the seated guests. Through the large glass panels of the front doors, I could see the aisle stretching out before me, lined with fragrant white petals. The afternoon sun was perfect, casting long, elegant shadows across the lawn. Liam was standing at the altar, looking incredibly handsome, his eyes locked on the doors, waiting for my cue. I smoothed the silk of my Vera Wang gown, feeling the weight of the cathedral train resting perfectly on the marble floor behind me. I was not nervous. I was not sad. I felt an overwhelming sense of profound clarity. This was the moment I had spent my entire life building toward. Not just the wedding, but the absolute liberation from the toxic shadows of my past. Beside me, stepping out from the private study where he had been waiting, was the man who was about to deliver the final devastating blow to Patricia's lifelong narrative. "Are you ready, Abigail?" he asked, his voice deep, rich, and vibrating with an authority that commanded instant respect. I turned to look at Thomas Baxter. He was 62 years old, impeccably dressed in a bespoke charcoal tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His silver hair was neatly styled, and his sharp, intelligent eyes mirrored my own. He was a billionaire real estate mogul, a man whose name commanded absolute deference in the Chicago business world. But more importantly, he was my biological father. I smiled, feeling a genuine warmth spread through my chest for the first time that day. "I am more than ready," I replied. For 33 years, Patricia had spun a web of horrific lies about this man. She told everyone in our extended family that my father was a deadbeat addict who had abandoned us and eventually died in a state penitentiary. She used that fabricated tragedy to garner sympathy and to justify her absolute control over my life. She claimed she had to be harsh with me so I would not end up like him. The truth was far more sinister. Patricia had forged legal documents, hidden my existence, and fled the state when I was a baby, simply because Thomas had discovered her extensive financial frauds during their brief marriage. 5 years ago, through sheer determination and my own resources, I had tracked him down. We had met in secret, slowly building a relationship based on mutual respect, shared ambition, and an undeniable genetic bond. He had become my mentor, quietly guiding my investments and helping me establish my PR firm. We had kept our relationship entirely hidden from Patricia, waiting for the precise moment when the truth would inflict the maximum possible damage to her empire of lies. That moment had finally arrived. The string quartet shifted seamlessly from the prelude into the traditional bridal chorus. The rich, soaring notes signaled my imminent arrival. I slipped my arm through Thomas's, feeling the solid, reassuring strength of his presence. He patted my hand gently, a silent promise that he would never let Patricia hurt me again. "Let us go show your mother exactly what happens when you try to rewrite history," Thomas murmured, a fierce, protective glint in his eye. The massive oak doors swung open, operated by 2 of my security agents. The bright afternoon sunlight flooded the foyer, illuminating us completely. I took a deep breath, lifted my chin, and took my first step down the aisle, completely ready to watch my mother's world burn to the ground. The heavy oak doors swung open, pulled back smoothly by two of my private security agents. The bright afternoon sunlight poured into the grand foyer, washing over me in a warm golden glow. The string quartet, seated beneath the sprawling branches of a massive weeping willow tree, transitioned flawlessly into a rich, swelling crescendo of the traditional bridal chorus. The sound carried across the manicured lawns, a beautiful, triumphant melody that signaled the beginning of my new life. The guests, seated in perfect rows on either side of the white petal-strewn aisle, all stood up and turned toward the mansion, their faces filled with anticipation. I stepped out onto the wide stone landing, the intricate French lace and hand-sewn pearls of my Verawang gown shimmering in the daylight. The cathedral-length train cascaded down the marble steps behind me, a physical manifestation of the elegance and success I had fought so hard to achieve. I looked absolutely breathtaking, a far cry from the insecure, overshadowed daughter my mother had always tried to mold me into. I was radiant, confident, and completely in control. I paused at the top of the stairs, allowing the guests a moment to take in the scene. My eyes swept over the crowd, eventually landing on the front row reserved for my family. Patricia, Richard, and Brittany were sitting there. They had clearly managed to bully their way past the confusion upstairs, perhaps slipping out while my security team was communicating with Jamal. Or perhaps my team had simply allowed them to leave the suite to take their seats, knowing the public humiliation awaiting them would be far more effective than keeping them locked in a room. Regardless of how they got there, they were exactly where I wanted them. Patricia was sitting with her back perfectly straight, an arrogant, smug smirk plastered across her face. She was practically vibrating with anticipation, waiting for the humiliating moment when I would be forced to walk down the lengthy aisle entirely alone. She wanted the entire crowd to witness my supposed isolation, to see firsthand that I was rejected by my own mother. She thought this would be the ultimate proof of her dominance over my life. But as I took my first deliberate step down the stone stairs, the arrogant smirk completely vanished from her face. It was wiped away in an instant, replaced by a look of absolute, unadulterated shock. I was not walking alone. My right arm was securely linked with Thomas Baxter. He walked beside me with the effortless grace and commanding presence of a man who owned the world. His bespoke charcoal tuxedo emphasized his broad shoulders, and his silver hair gleamed in the sunlight. He exuded an aura of immense wealth and undeniable authority. He did not look like a hired actor or a distant family friend. He looked exactly like what he was, a powerful patriarch proudly escorting his daughter. A collective audible gasp rippled through the seated guests. The sound was sharp and immediate, a wave of pure astonishment sweeping across the botanical gardens. The guests from Liam's side of the family, many of whom were prominent figures in the Chicago medical and legal communities, instantly recognized the billionaire real estate mogul. Whispers rapidly broke out, the quiet murmurs of confusion and awe, blending with the swelling music of the string quartet. "Is that Thomas Baxter?" I heard someone whisper loudly from the third row. "What is he doing here? Why is he walking Abigail?" But the most profound reaction came from the front row. Patricia's face turned an alarming shade of chalk white. She gripped the edge of her wooden chair so tightly, her knuckles turned pale, her eyes wide, and entirely panicked as she stared at the man she had spent 3 decades claiming was dead. Richard, sitting beside her, looked completely bewildered, his jaw practically dropping to his chest. He had heard the stories, the horrific lies Patricia had spun about her abusive addict first husband, but he had never seen a photograph of the man. Now he was watching a billionaire confidently walk me down the aisle, completely shattering the narrative he had blindly accepted for years. Brittany, sitting on the other side of Patricia, looked equally horrified. She recognized Thomas from various local magazine covers and charity galas she desperately tried to attend. Her mind was frantically trying to connect the dots, trying to understand why a man of his immense stature was participating in my wedding, especially after Patricia had assured her that my life was in complete financial ruin. I kept my head held high, my posture impeccable as we reached the bottom of the stone stairs and began our slow walk down the white petal aisle. I did not look at my mother again. I focused entirely on Liam, who was standing at the altar, a wide, incredibly proud smile spreading across his handsome face. He knew the truth. He knew exactly who Thomas was, and he knew the sheer magnitude of the bomb we had just detonated. Every step I took was a quiet, devastating victory. The intricate lace of my gown brushed against the white petals, the sound soft but significant. The lies my mother had built her entire life upon were crumbling with every passing second. The isolation she had tried to force upon me was completely obliterated by the presence of a father who genuinely loved and supported me. She wanted me to walk alone in shame, but instead I was walking surrounded by truth power and an undeniable display of my true worth. Thomas gently patted my arm, a silent gesture of reassurance. "We are almost there, Abigail," he murmured, his voice rich and steady, carrying only to my ears. "Keep your eyes forward. Do not give them the satisfaction of your attention." I nodded, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over me. The trap was sprung, the truth was out, and the reckoning was finally here. As Thomas and I advanced down the white petal aisle, the visual shock hitting the front row was absolute. Patricia had been holding her smartphone, likely preparing to record my humiliation, but her fingers simply gave out. The device slipped from her grasp and hit the grass with a dull thud. She did not even blink, let alone reach down to retrieve it. Her face had drained of all color, transforming into a sickly, chalky white. She looked like a woman who had just seen a ghost, which in her constructed reality was exactly what was happening. Beside her, Richard was physically struggling to process the scene. He leaned forward, gripping his knees, his mouth opening and closing as he stammered incoherently. He looked at Patricia, then back at Thomas, his brain desperately trying to reconcile the billionaire real estate titan walking toward him with the fabricated deadbeat addict his wife had described for over 3 decades. For 33 years, Richard had financed Patricia's lifestyle, believing he had rescued her from a tragic, ruined past. Now the living, breathing proof of her massive deception was staring right back at him, wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo and exuding more wealth and power in a single stride than Richard had seen in his entire life. Brittany looked completely lost. She kept darting her eyes between our mother and Thomas, her superficial mind clearly short-circuiting. She recognized the Baxter name. Everyone in Chicago knew the Baxter name. His company owned half the commercial skyline and sponsored the very influencer events she constantly tried to infiltrate. The realization that her sister was intimately connected to a billionaire patriarch was visibly breaking her brain. Her stolen white gown suddenly looked incredibly cheap and pathetic in the shadow of genuine generational wealth. The murmur of the crowd grew louder, a wave of hushed, urgent whispers sweeping across the botanical gardens. Liam's family, seated on the groom's side, were leaning over to each other, pointing discreetly and exchanging stunned looks. They had heard Patricia's tearful, vicious speech at the rehearsal dinner the night before. They had heard her call me an elitist fraud with no family loyalty. Now they were watching me being escorted by one of the most powerful men in the state. The contrast between Patricia's petty, desperate lies and my quiet, monumental reality was laying itself bare for everyone to judge. As we approached the front row, Thomas slowed his pace just a fraction. He turned his head and locked eyes directly with Patricia. The temperature in the garden seemed to plummet. His gaze was devoid of any warmth or forgiveness. It was the icy, calculating stare of a man who had built an empire and crushed corporate enemies for sport. He did not say a single word, but the message was deafeningly clear. "You are finished." Patricia shrank back into her wooden chair, physically recoiling from his gaze. The arrogant matriarch who had boldly hijacked a bridal suite just hours earlier was gone, replaced by a terrified, exposed fraud. She raised a trembling hand to her mouth, completely incapable of formulating a lie or staging a scene. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother completely silenced. She had built her entire identity on controlling the narrative, but she had absolutely no power here. She could not gaslight a billionaire. She could not manipulate the truth when it was standing right in front of her. We passed her row, leaving the toxic trio suffocating in their own shock, and reached the altar. The string quartet allowed the music to gently fade into a soft romantic finish. Liam stepped forward, his eyes shining with profound pride and overwhelming love. He had known about Thomas for months, but seeing the plan execute perfectly was a completely different experience. Thomas turned to me, his stern expression melting into a warm paternal smile. He took my hands in his, kissing my cheek with genuine affection. "You look beautiful, Abigail," he said softly, ensuring only Liam and I could hear. "I am so incredibly proud of the woman you have become." He turned to Liam, reaching out to firmly shake his hand. "Take care of my daughter, Liam," Thomas instructed, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "She is the best thing this family has ever produced." Liam smiled warmly, shaking his hand with equal firmness. "I promise you, sir, I will." Thomas took his seat in the front row on the bride's side. He sat entirely alone in the row Patricia had initially insisted be left empty to highlight my supposed isolation. Now that single seat contained more genuine love and power than Patricia could ever hope to comprehend. I turned to face my future husband, taking a deep breath of the fragrant garden air. The officiant stepped up to the microphone with a warm smile, seemingly oblivious to the seismic shockwave that had just ripped through the front row. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice carrying over the silent audience. I was standing in the exact venue my mother had tried to steal, wearing the dress she had tried to cancel, and I had just been given away by the father she had tried to erase. The visual shock of the billionaire reveal had effectively paralyzed Patricia, but I knew the true legal devastation was still waiting for her at the reception. Every step Thomas and I took down that petal-strewn aisle felt like a deliberate, methodical dismantling of the prison Patricia had built for me. The silence in the garden was absolute, broken only by the delicate sweeping of my train and the soaring notes of the string quartet. The guests were completely mesmerized by the unfolding drama, the sheer undeniable reality of a billionaire patriarch escorting the daughter his ex-wife claimed was fatherless. The contrast was devastating. As we approached the front row, Thomas did not look away. He turned his head slowly, his piercing gray eyes locking directly onto Patricia's pale, terrified face. His expression was a masterclass in silent, absolute condemnation. He did not sneer or yell. He simply looked at her with the cold, detached disgust one might reserve for an insect. It was the look of a man who had already won, a man who possessed the power to crush her entire existence, and was merely deciding whether or not it was worth his time. Patricia visibly withered under his gaze. The woman who had spent 33 years controlling the narrative through sheer volume and manipulation was entirely mute. She tried to open her mouth, perhaps to formulate some desperate face-saving lie, but no sound came out. She looked at Richard silently, begging him to intervene, but my stepdad was staring rigidly ahead, his face flushed with deep embarrassment, completely unwilling to challenge a titan like Thomas Baxter. We reached the altar, the floral arch framing us perfectly against the clear blue Chicago sky. Liam stepped forward, his eyes shining with a mixture of overwhelming love and profound respect. He had witnessed the emotional abuse I endured for years, and now he was watching the ultimate vindication. Thomas stopped, turning to face me. He took both of my hands in his grip firm and reassuring. His icy demeanor melted instantly, replaced by a deep, genuine paternal warmth. "You look absolutely magnificent, Abigail," he murmured, his voice rich and steady, ensuring only Liam and I could hear. "I am so incredibly proud of the woman you have become." He turned to Liam, reaching out to shake his hand with a powerful, commanding grip. "Take care of my daughter, Liam," Thomas instructed, his voice carrying the quiet, absolute authority of a man used to having his orders followed without question. "She is the best thing this family has ever produced." "I promise you, sir," Liam replied firmly, his voice unwavering. "I will." Thomas gave my hand one final squeeze before stepping back and taking his seat in the front row on the bride's side. He sat entirely alone in the row Patricia had initially insisted be left empty to highlight my supposed isolation. Now that single seat contained more genuine love and power than Patricia could ever hope to comprehend. It was in that exact moment, as Thomas sat down and Liam took my hand, that Patricia's survival instincts finally kicked in. The shock wore off, replaced by a sudden desperate need to regain control of the narrative. She could not stand being exposed. She could not stand losing the spotlight, even if the spotlight was currently burning her alive. She pushed her chair back, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the stone patio. She stood up abruptly, her face flushing a deep, angry red. "Wait a minute," she shrieked, her voice cutting harshly through the quiet elegance of the ceremony. "This is a sham. That man is an imposter." A collective gasp rippled through the seated guests. Liam's parents looked absolutely horrified. Brittany shrank further into her chair, realizing our mother had completely lost her mind. Patricia took a step toward the aisle, pointing a trembling finger at Thomas. "He abandoned us!" she screamed, her voice bordering on hysteria. "He is a deadbeat! He has no right to be here! This is my wedding!" She did not get to take a second step. Before the officiant could even react, two massive figures in dark charcoal suits materialized from the perimeter of the garden. They moved with terrifying speed and absolute silence. My private security agents stepped seamlessly into the aisle, placing themselves directly between Patricia and the altar. "Ma'am," one of the agents said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You need to sit down." "I will not be silenced," Patricia yelled, trying to push past the towering agent. "This is my daughter. This is my venue." Both agents moved simultaneously. They each placed a large, heavy hand squarely on Patricia's shoulders. The movement was not violent, but the sheer physical force was undeniable. They applied a firm, downward pressure, physically forcing her backward. Patricia stumbled, her knees buckling under the applied weight, and she was deposited unceremoniously back into her wooden folding chair. "Do not attempt to stand up again, ma'am," the second agent instructed coldly, taking up a position directly behind her chair, crossing his arms over his chest. The garden fell dead silent once more. The guests stared in shock at the woman who had just been forcibly restrained at her own daughter's wedding. Patricia sat rigidly in her chair, her chest heaving, tears of absolute humiliation finally spilling down her cheeks. She was trapped. She could not speak. She could not move. The absolute dominance she had wielded over my life had been physically and legally stripped away in a matter of seconds. I turned back to Liam, completely unfazed by the outburst. I offered him a calm, radiant smile. The officiant, recovering quickly from the interruption, cleared his throat and offered a polite, professional smile. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice echoing over the silent, captivated audience. "We are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Abigail and Liam." I stood in the venue my mother had tried to steal, wearing the dress she had tried to cancel, and holding the hand of the man I loved. The visual shock had paralyzed her, the security had silenced her, but I knew the true legal devastation was still waiting for her at the reception. The ceremony concluded flawlessly under the clear Chicago sky. Liam kissed me, and the crowd erupted in genuine applause, a stark contrast to the stunned silence from earlier. As we transitioned into the grand ballroom of the Grand Oak Estate for the reception, the atmosphere was electric. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the meticulously decorated tables, illuminating the absolute luxury of the space my mother had tried to hijack. Patricia, Richard, and Brittany had been ushered inside by my security detail. They were seated at a table near the back, completely isolated from the rest of the party. None of my extended family or Liam's relatives would even look in their direction. They were trapped in a prison of their own making, unable to leave without causing a bigger scene, yet forced to watch my absolute triumph. Dinner was served, an exquisite multi-course meal that my mother had publicly claimed I could not afford. The whispers in the room were entirely focused on the billionaire sitting at the head table next to me. Thomas Baxter commanded the space without even trying. After the plates were cleared and the champagne glasses refilled, the bandleader stepped up to the microphone. He announced the traditional father and daughter dance. A hush fell over the ballroom as Thomas stood up, offered me his arm, and escorted me to the center of the polished wooden dance floor. But instead of signaling the band to play, Thomas raised his hand and requested the microphone. The room went completely silent. Even the clinking of silverware stopped. Thomas held the microphone with the natural ease of a corporate titan addressing his board of directors. He looked out over the sea of faces, his gaze lingering just a fraction of a second longer on the shadowy corner table where Patricia sat trembling. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate Abigail and Liam," Thomas began, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the massive ballroom. "I know my presence today has caused quite a bit of confusion. For over 3 decades, many of you in Abigail's extended family were told a very specific story about me. You were told that I was a deadbeat. You were told that I was an addict who abandoned his family and died in a state penitentiary." Thomas paused, letting the weight of those lies hang in the heavy air. "I can assure you I am very much alive. The truth is far darker than the fiction Patricia sold you. 33 years ago, when Abigail was just an infant, I discovered that my then wife was systematically embezzling money from my early business ventures. When I confronted her and filed for divorce, she did not just pack her bags. She orchestrated a massive legal fraud." Thomas paced slowly across the dance floor, never letting go of my hand. "She forged my signature on custody relinquishment forms. She bribed a corrupt notary to process fraudulent court documents, completely erasing my legal rights as a father. She then vanished into the night with my daughter, changing her own last name and hiding behind a web of fake addresses. But she did not disappear completely. For 18 years, she illegally routed court-ordered child support through a ghost shell account, stealing money meant for Abigail, while simultaneously telling the world I was a monster who refused to pay a single dime." Gasps echoed from the tables. Aunt Diane, who had somehow managed to attend the reception after apologizing to me profusely, covered her mouth in absolute horror. Richard looked like he was going to be physically sick. He had bankrolled Patricia's life for decades, never knowing she was secretly funneling stolen child support into her own pockets. Patricia sat frozen, staring at the white tablecloth, completely stripped of her victim narrative. She was no longer a tragic single mother. She was a documented fraudster. But Patricia underestimated the brilliance of her own daughter. Thomas continued, turning to look at me with overwhelming pride. 5 years ago, Abigail began noticing discrepancies in her childhood medical records and financial filings. Using her own resources, she dug through decades of buried paperwork and tracked me down. When she walked into my corporate office 5 years ago, I got my life back. We took a DNA test proving what I already knew the second I saw her fierce, intelligent eyes. I found my daughter, and she found the truth. "Since that day, we have kept our reunion a strict secret," Thomas explained to the captivated audience. "We knew Patricia would stop at nothing to sabotage Abigail's life if she found out her ultimate lie had been exposed. Instead, I had the distinct honor of privately mentoring my daughter. I watched her build her massive public relations empire from the ground up. I guided her investments, helped her navigate the corporate world, and watched her become a formidable executive in her own right. She did not need my money, but she allowed me to be her father. And that is the greatest achievement of my entire life." Thomas handed the microphone back to the band leader. He turned to me, placing his hands gently on my shoulders. The string quartet began to play a soft instrumental acoustic melody. As we began to sway across the dance floor, the ballroom erupted into a massive standing ovation. The applause was deafening, a wave of pure support and validation that washed over us. I looked over Thomas's shoulder and saw Jamal standing near the edge of the dance floor, holding his red-stamped legal folder. The emotional destruction of Patricia was complete, but as Jamal caught my eye and checked his watch, I knew the final legal blow was exactly on schedule. The applause from the father and daughter dance was still echoing through the grand ballroom when Jamal stepped forward. He did not ask for the microphone. He did not need it. His commanding presence and the sheer gravity of the moment demanded absolute attention. He walked to the exact center of the polished wooden dance floor, standing under the massive crystal chandelier, the red-stamped manila folder clutched securely in his right hand. The band leader wisely stepped back, giving Jamal the floor. The guests, already reeling from the billionaire revelation, leaned forward in their chairs, sensing that the reckoning was not yet complete. Jamal turned his body deliberately facing the shadowy corner table where Patricia, Richard, and Brittany were seated. His expression was a perfect mask of legal detachment. Patricia shrank back into her chair, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of panic. She had already been exposed as a fraud and an embezzler. She could not fathom what else Jamal could possibly have in that red-stamped folder. Earlier today, Jamal began, his deep voice carrying clearly to every corner of the silent ballroom. Patricia made a very public, very aggressive claim. She stated that she had successfully canceled Abigail's wedding venue. She claimed she had bypassed the estate's automated systems, bribed the senior events director, and transferred the entire reservation to her youngest daughter, Brittany, to host an empowerment gala. Jamal paused, letting the absurdity of her actions sink in. He slowly raised the red-stamped folder, holding it up for the entire room to see. The bold red ink caught the light, signifying absolute legal authority. She was incredibly confident in her success. Jamal continued pacing slowly across the floor. She believed that a cash bribe and a few aggressive words were enough to override a legally binding commercial contract. And for a brief moment it seemed she had succeeded. The front desk attendant accepted her bribe. The events director humored her demands. She even managed to physically occupy the master bridal suite upstairs. Brittany, sitting next to Patricia, let out a small, pathetic sob. She was still wearing the massive white evening gown, looking entirely ridiculous, surrounded by the genuine elegance of the reception. But Patricia made a fatal miscalculation. Jamal stated, his voice dropping an octave, ringing with absolute finality. She assumed she was dealing with a standard hospitality corporation. She assumed the venue was owned by a faceless board of directors who could be bullied or bought. Jamal stopped pacing. He stood directly in front of their table, looking down at Patricia with cold, unyielding eyes. What Patricia did not know, Jamal revealed, his voice echoing loudly, is that the Grand Oak Estate was purchased in its entirety last month. The property, the mansion, the botanical gardens, and all commercial contracts associated with this venue were acquired by a private holding company, a limited liability company registered in the state of Illinois. Patricia's eyes darted frantically between Jamal and me. She was trying desperately to process the information, her mind scrambling for a loophole, a way out of the snare that was tightening rapidly around her. And when you attempted to bribe the staff and alter the contract this morning, Jamal explained, delivering the crushing blow. You were not stealing from a faceless corporation, Patricia. You were attempting to steal from the sole owner of that LLC. Jamal turned away from Patricia and faced the rest of the ballroom. He gestured grandly toward the head table, specifically toward me. Ladies and gentlemen, Jamal announced, his voice booming with undeniable triumph. Please allow me to formally introduce you to the CEO of that holding company and the sole absolute owner of the Grand Oak Estate, Abigail Baxter. The ballroom exploded. The sheer magnitude of the revelation hit the guests like a physical force. Aunt Diane gasped so loudly she nearly choked on her champagne. Liam's father let out a booming laugh of pure astonishment, clapping his hands together in absolute delight. The extended family, the people who had judged me, the people who had believed Patricia's lies about my supposed financial ruin, stared at me in complete awe. I was not just a successful PR executive. I was a real estate tycoon who literally owned the ground they were standing on. Patricia looked like she had been struck by lightning. She grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles turning bone white, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The realization hit her with devastating clarity. She had not hijacked the venue. She had walked directly into my house and attempted to steal it while I watched. Her entire plan, her vicious attempt to humiliate me, was completely obliterated. The ultimate power move she thought she possessed was entirely meaningless against the actual legal reality of my empire. I smiled, raising my champagne glass toward her in a silent, mocking toast. The payoff was absolute, but Jamal was not finished yet. The legal consequences of her actions on my property were about to arrive. Jamal let the heavy silence stretch for a few agonizing seconds, allowing the sheer weight of Abigail's ownership to crush whatever remaining defiance Patricia harbored. The smirk that usually danced on my mother's lips was entirely eradicated, replaced by a hollow, terrified slackness. She was looking at me not as a daughter she could easily manipulate, but as a corporate adversary who had just successfully engineered her absolute ruin. You see, Patricia Jamal continued, his voice dropping into the clinical, merciless cadence he used during cross-examinations. When you marched into the management office this morning, you thought you were outsmarting a rigid corporate policy. You offered a substantial cash bribe to the front desk attendant and the senior events director. You demanded they alter a high-value commercial contract and transfer the property rights for the evening to Brittany. Jamal stepped closer to their table, his tall frame casting a long, intimidating shadow over my mother. But what you did not realize was that the staff works directly for Abigail. The moment you handed over that envelope of cash and demanded the contract modification, the senior events director immediately called the CEO. Abigail instructed them to accept your cash play along with your demands and secure the physical evidence of your attempted bribery. Aunt Diane let out a low whistle of sheer disbelief. Richard pushed his chair back, physically distancing himself from his wife, his face buried in his hands. He was a man realizing he was legally shackled to a sinking ship, his retirement savings likely about to be drained by defense attorneys and restitution payments. By attempting to alter the contract and seize the venue through financial coercion, Jamal explained, projecting his voice so Liam's parents and the extended family could hear every single damning detail. You were not just being a difficult mother, you were committing felony corporate fraud against a registered limited liability company. You actively attempted to defraud Abigail's business out of an $80,000 asset. Brittany began to hyperventilate. The massive white evening gown she was wearing seemed to swallow her whole. She clutched Patricia's arm, but Patricia was too catatonic to offer any comfort. Brittany's influencer career was already dead, her luxury car was gone, and now she was an accessory to corporate fraud. And that brings me to the secondary offense, Jamal said, pivoting smoothly on his heel. He raised his left hand and pointed a long, elegant finger toward the upper corner of the grand ballroom. A small, discreet dome camera blinked with a steady red light. The Grand Oak Estate is a premier luxury property. Jamal noted, his tone conversational, but laced with lethal intent. As such, it is equipped with a state-of-the-art high-definition surveillance system. There are cameras in the lobby, the hallways, and yes, even in the main living area of the master bridal suite. Patricia flinched violently as if she had just been struck physically. We have crystal-clear time-stamped high-definition video footage of you forcefully occupying the master bridal suite this morning, Jamal declared, slapping the red-stamped folder against his palm for emphasis. We have audio recordings of you threatening the catering staff, declaring the room belonged to Brittany, and refusing to vacate the premises when politely prompted by the hotel management. Jamal leaned forward, placing both hands flat on their table, bringing his face dangerously close to Patricia's. Because the contract transfer was entirely fraudulent, and because the sole owner of the property never authorized your entry, your presence in that suite was not a simple misunderstanding. It was an illegal occupation. Jamal stood back up, adjusting his suit jacket with a sharp, precise tug. In the state of Illinois, Jamal pronounced, his voice ringing with absolute, terrifying finality, breaking into a restricted commercial space, refusing to leave, and attempting to claim ownership of the property constitutes criminal trespassing. Combined with your earlier confession to identity theft regarding Brittany's auto loan, you have built a remarkably comprehensive criminal record in less than 48 hours. The ballroom was absolutely spellbound. Nobody dared to take a sip of their drinks or whisper to their neighbors. They were watching a masterclass in legal execution. Jamal had meticulously laid out the trap, allowed Patricia to walk directly into the center of it, and then systematically erected an impenetrable fortress of evidence around her. Patricia finally found her voice, though it was nothing more than a ragged, desperate whisper. "You cannot do this. I am your mother." She looked at me across the room, her eyes wide with a frantic, pleading terror. "Abigail, please, tell him to stop. We are family." I set my champagne glass down on the white tablecloth. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small, worthless, and entirely dependent on her conditional approval. I looked at the sister who had happily participated in my emotional destruction for her own selfish gain. I leaned forward, making sure my voice carried clearly across the silent expanse of the dance floor. Family does not steal from family mother. Family does not forge legal documents, embezzle wedding funds, or hijack a bridal suite. I am simply holding you to the exact same rigorous standards of accountability you always demanded from me. Jamal checked his watch once more, a grim, satisfied smile touching the corners of his mouth. The legal trap had closed completely. The evidence was irrefutable, the witnesses were abundant, and the final consequences of Patricia's lifelong arrogance were literally pulling into the driveway. The faint, unmistakable wail of local police sirens pierced the quiet evening air, rapidly growing louder as they approached the private iron gates of the Grand Oak estate. The flashing red and blue lights began to dance across the massive windows of the grand ballroom, casting an eerie glow over the stunned wedding guests. Patricia froze entirely, her mouth hanging open as her arrogant facade washed away. Jamal casually buttoned his suit jacket and took a step back, gracefully clearing the path for the inevitable conclusion to the trap he had flawlessly executed. The heavy double doors of the ballroom swung open, and 4 uniformed police officers stepped inside, their expressions serious and professional. The band leader immediately killed the background music, plunging the room into absolute silence, save for the heavy footfalls of the officers marching directly toward the back corner table. A tall officer with a silver badge gleaming on his chest stopped right in front of my mother. "Patricia Baxter?" he asked, his voice echoing loudly. Patricia could not speak. She simply stared up at him, her body trembling so violently that her water glass rattled against the table. Jamal smoothly stepped forward, handing the lead officer the thick red-stamped manila folder. "Officer, here are the signed fraud affidavits from the primary account holder, along with the formal notice of default regarding the felony identity theft," Jamal explained calmly. "I also have the digital drive containing the surveillance footage of the criminal trespassing that occurred on this property earlier today." The officer briefly reviewed the top document, nodded respectfully at Jamal, and turned back to Patricia. "Ma'am, please stand up," he ordered firmly. "You are under arrest for felony identity theft, corporate fraud, and criminal trespassing." Patricia let out a guttural, horrific wail. It was the raw, primal, devastating sound of a narcissist realizing she had permanently lost control. She tried to cling to the white tablecloth, begging Richard to do something, but my stepdad had finally reached his limit. He simply stood up, turned his back to her, and walked away without uttering a single word. He was completely done financing her endless, pathetic delusions. The officers pulled Patricia to her feet, swiftly pulling her arms behind her back. The metallic click of the handcuffs locking around her wrists echoed across the silent ballroom. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. 2 officers gripped her arms and began marching her across the polished wooden dance floor. She was forced to walk the ultimate perp walk, right past Aunt Diane, Uncle George, and Liam's entire family, all of whom watched her utter disgrace with undisguised contempt. As the police escorted Patricia out the front doors, another flashing light caught the attention of the guests near the windows. A heavy-duty tow truck with bright yellow strobe lights was backing slowly up the cobblestone driveway. It came to a halt directly in front of the valet station, right next to the brand-new Mercedes-Benz SUV that Brittany had arrogantly parked in the VIP circle. Brittany, who had frantically followed the police out into the grand foyer, let out a piercing scream. "No, wait! My purse is in there!" she shrieked, hiking up her stolen white evening gown and attempting to run outside. But the recovery agent was already securing the heavy steel chains to the front axle. By the time Brittany reached the pavement, the hydraulic lift was already raising the front tires off the ground. She collapsed onto the cobblestone driveway, sobbing hysterically into her tulle skirt, as the tow truck dragged her status symbol off the property. I stood near the head table watching the flashing lights disappear forever. The toxic weight that had pressed down on my chest for 33 years evaporated entirely. The ballroom doors closed, and the bandleader launched into a triumphant jazz number. The tension broke instantly as waiters swept through the room with fresh trays of champagne. I turned around to find Liam, Jamal, and Thomas standing right behind me. Liam pulled me into a warm embrace, kissing the top of my head. Jamal raised his crystal flute, a victorious smile lighting up his handsome face. And Thomas, my real father, looked at me with a depth of pride that healed every wound my mother had ever inflicted. I picked up my own glass. To transparency, Jamal toasted, tapping his glass against mine. To family, Liam added softly. And to the architect of this beautiful empire, Thomas concluded, smiling directly at me. I raised my glass high. I was Abigail Baxter. I had burned the old world to the ground, and I was entirely ready to rule the new one. Cheers, I said, taking a long, deeply satisfying sip of the sweetest victory of my life.